All right, what's up, guys? Nick here with Late Night Chess, and I am posting a video today going over today's chess.com puzzle. So I thought I would post a video for some of chess.com's Saturday puzzles, which are notoriously the most difficult puzzles, and thought instead of maybe posting a written blog post, instead I would do a video and just going over all the variations. So what you see here is today's puzzle on September 19th, and it's white to move. And let's just take a look at what the board is telling us. So if I look from White's perspective at the material, I'm down quite a bit of material, right? So I'm down a rook and a knight, but I have two pretty strong passed pawns that I want to see if I can try and leverage. So it's white to move, and obviously this knight is hanging in a lot of ways. I could take with the pawn, I could take with the rook, I could take with the king, and then hopefully after I take the knight, my plan would be to maybe see how I can get these pawns rolling down the board. The first question, though, is since this is a puzzle, there's only one correct move. All three of these captures seem reasonable. And so the first thing we should probably do is take a look at which of these three captures, if any of them, actually work. So let's take a look first at king takes c7. So if king takes c7, then black actually has some resourceful moves to really kind of lock these pawns in and prevent them from promoting easily. Black can play rook c8, check, pushing the king over to the right side of the board. And then after something like king f6, which is the most reasonable move, threatening some really nasty threats here with rook d8, White would have to play something like rook d7. And then after rook a8, these pawns are pretty frozen. White can't play something like b7 because the rook can just take here on a7. And even if the pawn promotes to a queen after that variation, then just simply rook takes b8, rook takes a7, and both sides have a rook and black's up a pawn, so that shouldn't be too difficult for black to win. So king takes c7, although it looks like a reasonable move here, doesn't really work because black has quite a few resources to put the king in check and also to stop the pawn from promoting. Similarly, when we look at rook takes c7, we have a similar idea of just simply rook a8, and we have a very similar position here, right? After b7, the rook can just simply take on a7. And although white might be slightly better here, even though he's down an entire rook, he's got some pretty serious threats. There's nothing seriously forcing. The last variation to look at, though, is b takes c7, which actually is indeed the correct move. B takes c7. So let's take a look at what black can do after b takes c7. So obviously this pawn is threatening to take the rook, and so we have to do something about that. Probably I don't want the rook to leave the 8th rank, since both of these rooks are doing a better job on the 8th rank to make white really have to think hard about how he's going to promote here. So if that's the case, then really black only has a few moves. Rook e8, rook c8, and rook a8. In the puzzle solution, they show rook a8. If something like rook c8, it's very straightforward for white. White can just play rook b8, and now I'm threatening to promote my pawn here on a8, and obviously if black captures, I can capture back with either pawn and get a queen. And if black captures the queen, then I take with the other pawn and I'm up an entire queen. So black's best chances here, or best try, is rook a8. And now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. If I'm looking at this as white, there seem to be, I would say, two reasonable moves here. And I will confess, the first move that I looked at was not the correct move, but it seems the most natural, and that's rook to b8. It seems that after rook to b8, well, I'm threatening to take either one of the rooks. Maybe I want to bring my king in and then promote one of these pawns. But rook to b8 actually doesn't quite work. And the reason why is black can play rook takes a7, which is very resourceful, taking this pawn. And you'd think, well, you know, after I capture this rook, once the king captures back, couldn't I just simply promote this pawn to a queen? And it's true that if the king takes back after I take this rook, that is true, but black has a really nice intermezzo move. So after rook takes f8, black can play rook takes c7. right? Sacrificing the rook, but eliminating white's two pawns that are on the 7th rank. And after king takes, this is going to be obviously a better endgame for black, as black has the 3 pawns versus white's only 2. So black is obviously better here. So a very resourceful move, rook takes a7, that really prevents rook b8 from being the correct move. So the correct move here is king b6. And the reason why king b6 works is because now this rook b8 idea does work. Because after rook b8, no longer does black have rook takes a7, right? Which was the whole idea of this previous move. After rook b8, the rook could take on a7. Now black doesn't have that after king b6. So after king b6, white really is threatening to play rook b8 and starting to think about how he can either push this pawn or maybe take this rook. So black doesn't have a lot of really good moves here. His rooks are, for the most part, on pretty good squares. So black is thinking about bringing his king in and maybe starting to put pressure on white's pawns. But now white can play rook b8. And now we have some serious threats here, as you'll see in a second. So the king comes in to e7. And now there's really 3 moves we should look at or consider. One is what happens if I take the a8 rook. The other is what happens if I take the f8 rook. And lastly, what happens if I just simply bring my king in and start threatening to both promote and take the rook with the king, right? All 3 of those moves at first glance seem pretty reasonable. So let's take a look at those one by one. We'll start with rook takes f8. So after rook takes f8, believe it or not, black is actually better here. After rook takes f8, obviously the whole idea of taking the f8 rook is I want to bring my king in and start, pushing these pawns. And it seems like white should have an advantage here. But there's a really resourceful move that black has, which is king d7. And now with king d7, obviously I can't promote my c pawn, or else the rook will simply take. And then if I promote my a pawn, well, the rook will just take that, king takes, and I have a better endgame. And if a8 queen immediately, let's take a look at that variation, a8 queen, well, then black can just not sacrifice, but take the queen. And then after king takes the rook, king takes pawn, and again, we have this 3 versus 2 endgame that black is going to be better. Not only is black up a pawn, but his king is in a better position to start coming down and capturing these pawns. So rook takes f8 doesn't quite work. What about rook takes a8? Well, if I play rook takes a8, we have a similar idea after black plays rook takes a8, king b7, and then now a really fun move, a move that might be kind of hard to see. And in fact, pause the video and see if you can find what black's correct response for this is. All moves for black lose except for one, which saves the game for black. So if you found the move, congratulations. Pretty cool move. It's actually king d7. So the black, black says, go ahead and take my rook. And if you take my rook, then I'm just going to play king takes c7, and now your king is boxed out. And so white has no moves on this side of the board, so he has to just start pushing these pawns, and eventually we'll get into a stalemate. Right? Eventually white's going to run out of moves here as he pushes these pawns. And obviously black doesn't want to come back because then white can play king b8 and promote. And so this is going to end up being a draw. So very resourceful move, king d7, to save the game and not allow white a win. So rook takes f8 didn't work, rook takes a8 didn't work. Now let's look at king b7. And king b7 looks very good for a lot of reasons. I'm threatening to promote, I'm threatening to take this rook, I could maybe take this rook. There's a lot of threats that I probably want to look at here. And so after king b7, obviously black doesn't want to take this rook because I'm just going to promote to a queen. And then after black takes the queen, I'm going to get another queen. So black definitely doesn't want to go that direction. So probably the most reasonable try is king d7 to just kind of further guard this c8 square. But now white can just simply take the rook. Now, white can take the rook in 2 ways. He can take with his own rook, or he can take with the king. Now, if he takes with the rook, we get a similar position that we saw in that last variation after rook takes a8, king takes a8, and then king takes c7. And we have these stalemate ideas, again, where the king cannot come out. as the black king is preventing him from coming out. And so white will just have to kind of push these pawns and we'll run into a stalemate. So rook takes a8 doesn't work, but king takes a8 does work, right? Because after king takes a8, there's really not a lot of good moves here for black, right? White is threatening to take black's rook here. Obviously, I don't want to come back and defend the rook with my king, or I'll just promote to a queen. And so rook c8 is as good a move as any. And then after rook c8, again, there's probably two moves that look reasonable. Rook takes c8 and king b7. But actually, after rook takes c8, king takes c8, we have very similar stalemate tricks again, right? So this is going to be a draw as the king can't come out. And even though white has this extra pawn, the black king is preventing it from being able to move. So again, white's only moves are to push these pawns, and we'll run into another stalemate situation. So that doesn't quite work. So the correct move is king b7. And now this is game over. The puzzle ends here. White is able to promote to a queen. Obviously, black taking this rook is not going to do him any good. And so this is absolutely game over. White's going to get a lot of material and be able to win a very simple endgame. So anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video or appreciated the video analysis versus the blog, leave a comment in the YouTube section, on the comment section of my YouTube video. And I may start doing this every Saturday, just doing kind of a video blog on the puzzle instead of a written one, as I think these puzzles can be sometimes pretty complicated, and it's more helpful for someone to give more vocal explanation than written explanation on this. So if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I also post other content. I've posted a couple series on endgames. I'm going to continue doing that, and obviously some Twitch highlights as well. For Twitch, I stream on Saturday mornings, USA time, and so feel free to tune in if you're around for that. So thanks everyone for stopping by, and I will talk to y'all soon.